Wyoming Territory, October 1887, the rain came down like the sky had split open, cold and angry, drenching everything in sight as thunder rolled low across the plains. Cora Kensington's boots sank in the mud with every step, her shawl soaked through and clinging to her arms like wet paper. She had knocked on 3 doors in the past hour, 3 houses with chimneys smoking and lanterns in the window, and not one soul had let her in. "Please," she had said at the last place, her voice shaking from the cold, her fingers red and stiff. "Just until the storm passes." The woman who answered had narrowed her eyes and shut the door without a word. Cora had stood there for a moment, blinking through the rain before turning back to the road. Her bonnet had slipped off miles ago, taken by the wind, and her carpet bag was growing heavier with each step. She had not eaten since morning. She had not slept in 2 days, and every part of her ached. She did not know how far she had wandered from the main road, how long she had been walking. But as the lightning flashed, she saw a narrow path veer off toward a low hill, and just beyond it, the dim shape of a cabin. She hesitated, teeth chattering. Then she pushed forward, rain soaking through the seams of her dress. It was a small place, plain, weather-worn. But there was light in the window and smoke curling from the chimney. She stepped onto the porch and knocked. Once, then again, the door opened a crack. A man stood behind it, tall and broad-shouldered with a rifle in one hand. His face was half in shadow, but his eyes were sharp and steady. "I am not looking for trouble," Cora said, her voice weak. I need shelter, please." He looked her over, his eyes lingering on her soaked clothes, the bruises blooming faintly at her wrist, the desperation in her face. Then he opened the door wider. "You are half frozen," he said. "Come in." Cora stepped inside, the warmth of the fire like a slap after the cold. The man shut the door behind her, setting the rifle aside. "I have no money," she said quickly. "I can clean, so I will earn a place by the fire." "I did not ask for payment," he said. "Sit down." "You are shaking." She sank onto the chair near the hearth. Her hair was dripping, her fingers like ice. The man disappeared into a back room and returned with a wool blanket, which he draped around her shoulders. Then he crouched by the fire and stirred the logs, coaxing the flames higher. "I am Cora Kensington," she said quietly, her voice still shivering. He looked over his shoulder. "Malden Zayne." Their eyes met. Outside, the storm howled. Inside, the silence between them grew thick with something neither of them could name. Malden rose and moved to the stovetop where a kettle had begun to rattle. He poured hot water into a tin cup and brought it to her. She took it with both hands. "Thank you." "You were turned away." "Yes," she whispered. He sat down across from her, his hand resting on his knee. "You are safe here." She nodded, though her breath still trembled. They did not speak for a long time. The only sound was the fire snapping and popping and the storm raging beyond the window. Later, Malden set out a bowl of stew and a piece of bread. Cora ate slowly, her hunger quiet but sharp. He watched her without asking questions. He did not push, he did not pry. After dinner, she stood and reached for her bag. "Where should I sleep?" Malden shook his head. "You are not strong enough to sleep out there. Take the bed." "I will stay by the fire." She hesitated, but his tone left no room for argument. That night, while the wind rattled the shutters and the rain beat against the roof, Cora lay beneath a heavy quilt in a stranger's bed, clutching the warmth of it like a lifeline. She did not know why he had helped her, but the memory of his hand, steady on her arm as he led her inside, came back to her again and again. He had looked her in the eye, he had seen her, and he had said simply, "Home." She did not cry, but her chest ached with something close. The next morning the storm had passed. The sky was sharp and blue, the ground slick with mud and broken branches. Cora stepped outside, wrapped in her borrowed blanket, and stared out across the open land. Malden was splitting wood at the edge of the clearing. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow, his hands steady on the axe. When he saw her, he paused and gave a single nod. "You sleep." "I did," she said. "Thank you." He swung the axe again, driving it through the log with clean power. She watched him for a moment. "Is this your land?" He nodded. "Homestead claim, been here 6 years. Alone." "Yes," she swallowed. "Why did you let me in?" He stopped, setting the axe aside. "Because someone should have, and I have room." Cora looked down at her hands. "I have nowhere to go." Malden stepped toward her, his voice low but sure. Then stay. She looked up at him, startled. I do not mean as a guest, he said. Not just for the storm, I mean, stay, this place is quiet, but it is not much of a life on your own. She stared at him, heart-thudding. I do not know your story, he said, but I see you carry something heavy. So do I. Maybe we set it down here, together. Cora's throat tightened. I can build you a room, he said. You do not owe me anything. She stepped down from the porch and stood in front of him. You are a stranger, he nodded. So are you. They stood in silence, the wind curling through the grass around them. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. Her voice was barely a whisper. All right. Malden looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face. Then I will keep you safe. And just like that, something shifted in the air between them, something quiet and strong. Cora had been turned away at every door. But here, in the heart of open land, a man had looked her in the eye, taken her hand, and said, home. And it had felt like the truth. The frost came early that year, silvering the grass in the mornings and drawing fine webs of ice across the water barrel by the back steps. Cora rose each day before the sun, wrapping herself in one of Malden's old coats that hung too loose in the shoulders, but kept the wind out. She had asked him for work, and he had shown her where the hens laid and how to gather eggs without spooking them. When she'd asked for more, he'd watched her a moment, then handed her a worn pair of gloves and pointed to the stack of dried thistle choking the edge of the garden bed. You ever keep a kitchen plot in Illinois? Before, he nodded once and left her to it. By the end of the week, she had cleared the weeds, turned the soil, and begun sketching rows in the dirt with a stick, even if planting wouldn't come until spring. Her hands were blistered and her back ached, but the pain felt honest in a way she hadn't known in years. Malden didn't hover. He worked the land with quiet precision, splitting fence rails, tending to the mule, hauling feed from the shed with the ease of long habit. He didn't speak unless there was something needing saying. Still, his presence settled her more than any word might. One afternoon, as the wind thinned and the air held that brittle stillness before snow, she found him oiling the hinges on the barn door. You built this place yourself, he wiped his hands on a rag. Mostly. My brother helped me raise the beams. He died 3 winters back. She didn't answer right away. I had a sister, younger. Scarlet fever took her at 13. He looked at her, and for a moment neither of them moved. I'd be glad to help patch the chicken coop roof before it caves in, she said, shifting the weight of her thoughts. He gave a slow nod. Ladders by the shed, watch your footing. That beam's soft on the left. She climbed it carefully, balancing with the nails tucked into her apron pocket. The shingles were brittle, flaking under her touch, but her hands were steady. When she came down, Malden was waiting with a mug of boiled cider. You didn't have to, she said, taking it. You're fixing my roof. They stood in the low light, the cider warming her palms. Do you miss being around people? She asked. I miss some of them. Not all. She watched him for a moment. I used to think I'd end up in a town, running a shop maybe, sewing dresses. I was learning the trade when I left home. What changed? She drew in a breath. A man thought he wanted a wife. Turned out he wanted something else. Something colder. He didn't ask more. Later, as the sun dipped and the first flakes of snow began to fall, he brought in an old cedar trunk from the loft and set it at the edge of the hearth. Things from before, he said, lifting the lid. Inside were old tools, a quilt stitched with initials, a leather-bound Bible with a cracked spine. She reached for the quilt, fingers tracing the thread. Your mother's, my brother's wife. She died in childbirth. They sat in silence a while, the snow tapping softly at the windows. You ever want to leave this place? She asked. He looked toward the porch. No, but I used to wonder if anyone might come who wanted to stay. She folded the quilt gently and set it back. I never thought I'd belong anywhere again, she said. He met her eyes. Maybe we both were wrong. That night, she washed her hands in the basin, the water gone cold by then. Malden stood by the door, watching the snow build over the fields. You'll need better boots, he said. Before the deep snow comes. I can mend these for now, he nodded, but his jaw worked like he was thinking something over. I'll take you to the trading post next week if the trail holds. She turned toward him. You do that. I don't aim to keep you half-shod all winter. She smiled, then small but full. He didn't return it, but there was something softer in his gaze. "You've worked hard," he said. "You've made something out of this place already." "So have you." He held her eyes a long moment. "You're not just passing through, are you?" She stepped closer. "No," he reached out then, his hand brushing hers, slow and certain. "I'm glad you knocked on my door, Cora. I'm glad you opened it." And though neither of them said more, the quiet between them was full of something building slow, steady, and sure as the snow blanketing the world outside. The snow deepened across the prairie, piling in drifts along the fence lines and softening the edges of every tree and outbuilding. It made the world quieter somehow, as though the land had taken a breath and was holding it. Cora found herself waking early without need of an alarm, her body attuned now to the rhythm of the place. She tied her hair up quickly, pulled on the heavier wool skirt she'd mended herself, and stepped into the boots Malden had helped her pick out at the trading post 2 days prior. The soles were thick and stiff still, but they held firm over the frozen ground. Inside the cabin, the warmth from the hearth hadn't yet reached the corners. Malden stood at the table, sharpening a wood-handled drawknife. He glanced up as she stepped in from the lean-to, her arms full of kindling. "You see the tracks?" he asked. Cora set the bundle near the stove. "Rabbit, too wide, could be a lynx, came close to the coop." "I'll check the latch after breakfast." He nodded once, then set the blade aside and reached for the pot hanging over the fire. The smell of cornmeal and molasses filled the room as he stirred. She watched him a moment. "Did you always plan to claim land?" "No," he said. "I was headed for Idaho to join a trapping outfit, got turned around in a storm, same as you. Found this place instead. Stayed because you wanted to. I stayed because the land didn't ask anything of me I wasn't willing to give." She sat across from him, resting her hands on the tabletop. "It's strange. I used to think I needed a town to feel safe." He poured 2 bowls and set one in front of her. "You feel safe here?" "I do." They ate in silence, the only sound the soft scrape of spoons against tin. Afterward, Cora pulled her shawl tighter and stepped outside to inspect the coop. The latch held, but she spotted the faint outline of prints trailing past the edge of the barn, then disappearing into the timber. When she turned, Malden was already approaching with a rifle slung across his back. "Trail's fresh," she said. He crouched to study the snow. "Won't come near with us moving about, but I'll set a snare. I can check it with you in the mornings." He looked up. "You're not afraid?" Cora shook her head. "Not of beasts." They walked the edge of the tree line, the hush between them easy now, broken only by the occasional rustle of snow falling from a branch. He showed her how to set the trigger stick, how to mask human scent with pine needles crushed between their palms. "As they worked," she said, "my father farmed wheat. He wanted a son but taught me to drive a plow anyway." Malden adjusted the loop of wire and glanced at her. "He raised you hard?" "No. But he raised me to last." That night she brought out the bolt of muslin she'd bartered for in town and laid it across the table, smoothing it flat. Malden was carving a handle for a spade, the shavings curling at his feet. "What are you making?" he asked. "Curtains." "For the front window." He paused his whittling. "Didn't know we needed any." "We don't," she said, "but it'll keep the cold from creeping in." He watched her measure and cut, her fingers deft and steady. "You got a way of putting things right without saying much." She glanced over. "You mind?" "No," he said. "I like it." Later, she stood by the fire, rubbing a knot from her shoulder. Malden came up beside her, not too close, and offered her a tin of warmed bear grease. "Good for sore muscles," he said. "Works better than whiskey." She took it, their fingers grazing. "That's a high claim. You're welcome to test it." "I will." She dipped her thumb into the salve and pressed it gently to the tight spot beneath her collarbone. Malden stayed where he was, looking into the flames. "You planning to sew more than curtains? If your trousers keep tearing at the knees, I might have to." He gave a low chuckle. "Fair." The firelight painted his face in amber and shadow, and for a moment she saw the lines around his eyes not as weariness, but as the mark of someone who had spent years in quiet watchfulness. She spoke softly. "I've never had anyone look after me without expecting something in return." Malden didn't turn. "I don't expect anything." I know, she said. He was quiet for a long time before he asked, "What would you want if you could start fresh?" Cora looked down at her hands. "To grow something with my own two hands, to know the ground I stood on was mine, not borrowed, and to belong somewhere." Malden turned to her then. "You do," she looked up, eyes meeting his. "You mean that?" He nodded once. "I wouldn't say it if I didn't." Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. "Then I'll stay, not just for the snow or the shelter. I'll stay because I want to." He didn't reach for her, he didn't have to. The air between them was thick with something quiet but certain. "All right," he said. And in that still, firelit space, the shape of something lasting settled between them like the snow on the roof, soft, sure, and here to stay. The wind shifted days later, carrying the dry bite of true winter. Cora felt it in her jaw first, stinging where her scarf didn't reach, and in the stillness of the trees that no longer creaked under their own weight. She had begun weaving a rag rug near the hearth, using strips she'd cut from old shirts Malden no longer wore. The work was slow, but her hands moved with purpose. Malden came in from the shed near dusk, snow crusted along his boots, a hinge and short length of chain in his hand. Something break, smokehouse door. The pins rusted through. He set the pieces down and unbuttoned his coat, his shoulders dusted with fine snow. Cora stood, brushing the fabric from her lap. "I'll heat water. You'll want to wash before supper." "I'll fix the hinge first. Won't take long." She paused at the stove. "You always put off what you need for what needs fixing." He didn't answer right away. "That's just how I was raised. I know the feeling. My mother used to say the stew can burn, but you never leave a gate swinging in the wind." He glanced over, one corner of his mouth twitching. "Sounds like a woman who ran a tight place." She did. Until she couldn't anymore. She didn't say more, and he didn't ask. Instead, he poured a palmful of oil from the jar by the tools and knelt to sort the chain links. They ate by lantern light, the windows fogged from the heat inside. Cora ladled stew into his bowl, then her own, and tore the heel of bread she'd baked that morning. Malden ran his thumb along the rim of his cup before speaking. "I'm thinking of planting barley in the spring. The soil's held up better than I expected. You'll need more seed." "I've got enough put by." She stirred her bowl. "I could handle the garden myself if you're out in the north field. You'd be willing?" "I've worked harder for less." He nodded, setting his spoon down. "If we're going to do this right, I'd want you to have say in it." She looked up. "In the land, in the life." The silence that followed wasn't uneasy. It sat between them with weight and meaning, like something long unsaid had finally eased into daylight. After the dishes were washed and set upside down to dry, Cora reached for her coat. "I'll bring in the kindling for morning." Malden straightened from the hearth. "I'll go with you." They stepped into the dark together, the stars sharp overhead. The snow was packed firm now, their boots crunching as they crossed to the lean-to. She filled her arms with the dried splits she'd stacked earlier, watching as Malden checked the latch on the barn once more. He glanced at the sky. "There'll be more snow by morning." She followed his gaze. "I don't mind it. You've taken to this place quick." "It's not the land so much," she said. "It's the quiet and the steadiness." He looked at her then, his breath rising like smoke in the cold. "You've brought something into this house I didn't realize was missing." She didn't look away. "You've given me steadiness I thought I'd lost for good." He stepped closer, not hurried. "I want you to have more than just shelter here, Cora." The firewood pressed between her arms and her chest, her breath visible in the space between them. "I want to be here because it's mine too," she said. "Not just a place I was allowed to stay." He lifted the bundle from her arms and set it down beside the door. Then he reached for her hand, slow and sure, and she gave it without hesitation. "I want you beside me," he said. "Not out of debt, not out of need. Just because." Cora's voice was quiet but clear. "Then I'm already yours." He didn't kiss her, not yet, but his hand tightened around hers, and in that still moment beneath the stars, she felt it, that word again, not spoken but lived, home. Cora dipped the last of the tallow candles and hung it beside the others along the peg rack. The scent of beeswax still clung to the air, faint but sweet. Outside, the snow had settled into familiar shapes: fence posts, the lean-to sloped roof, the round shouldered rise of the well mound. There were no more storms in the forecast. Malden read the sky better than any almanac, but the cold had deepened. Inside, the cabin held steady warmth, banked from the fire and the thick walls he'd built himself, log by log. He came in from the barn carrying a pair of rabbit pelts, his coat dusted with saw shavings. Cora watched him shake off the snow and hang the pelts to dry near the stove. "They were caught clean," he said. "You've got a good hand with snares. I had a good teacher." He sat on the bench and began scraping the hide with a curved blade. She moved to the table, folding the last of the mended linens into the trunk she now used as her own. They hadn't drawn lines through the cabin, hadn't named rooms or rights, but the space had shifted. There were 2 cups always left out, her sewing basket beneath the window, his tools organized along the wall with the care of someone who expected another's hands to reach for them. He looked up. "You ever think about building something on the back lot, for storing root vegetables?" He shook his head. "For living." She ran her palm over the folded cloth beside her. "You mean a second cabin?" "I mean something new, something we build together." Her eyes met his. "You want to start over again?" "No," he said. "I want to start forward, with you." They'd never spoken of marriage, not directly, but the word hung there now between them. Not with fanfare or proposal, but as a fact, as real as the frost on the window panes. Cora crossed to the bench and sat beside him. "Would you want it simple?" He turned the hide, careful and even. "I'd want it honest. I don't need a preacher," she said, "but I'd like to stand with you and know it's done proper." "I've got a neighbor, Finch, a few miles east," he said. "He's licensed to marry folks, quiet man, keeps to himself unless asked." She nodded. "Then we'll ask." They went in the next week, bundled in wool and carrying a parcel of bread and dried peaches as thank you. Finch's wife laid out a clean cloth, and the man himself read the vows with a voice like a worn hymn. Cora wore a blue shawl she'd sewn from leftover muslin, and Malden had shaved for the first time in weeks. Afterward, Finch handed them a paper, signed and witnessed, folded with care. "Not that you seem the type to forget what you've promised," he said, "but it's good to have it written down all the same." They rode home with the sun behind them and the scent of pine on the wind. Malden didn't speak until they reached the ridge above the homestead. He pulled up the mule and looked down at the stretch of land below, the smoke rising from their chimney, the fence line she'd helped mend, the small garden bed she'd marked back in autumn. "I never thought I'd share this place. I never thought I'd find one worth sharing." They didn't hurry down the trail. The mule walked slow and they let it. When they reached the cabin, he helped her from the saddle and held her hand a beat longer than needed. That night they sat close by the fire, not needing words. She rested her head against his shoulder and he laid his arm around her like it belonged there. Winter thawed slowly. Each day brought a little more light, a little more give in the ground. By March, they'd cleared the back plot and dug the first rows for spring planting. They worked side by side, her hands in the soil, his steady with the plow. One afternoon, she paused at the edge of the furrow and looked out over the land. "You think it'll hold?" "It's held this long," he said. "And now it's holding more." She reached for his hand. He took it without hesitation. By summer, the barley had sprouted clean and green, and the garden bloomed with beans, squash, and rows of early potatoes. Cora hung linens on the line she and Malden had strung between 2 cedars and watched the sun stretch long across the yard. Children from the neighboring homesteads came by sometimes, bringing eggs or trading milk for soap. One girl, no more than 8, admired the curtains Cora had sewn. "They look like the kind in a teacher's house," she said after she left. Malden said, "You ever think of teaching?" Cora turned from the window. "I think I've already started." In August, they built a small porch on the back of the cabin, just wide enough for 2 chairs. They sat there in the evenings, watching the sky darken and the stars come out one by one. On the first night the crickets sang again, Malden reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You still glad you stayed?" "I never wanted anything more." She leaned her head against him. His arm came around her, sure and easy. They watched the stars together, the land quiet and full around them, and the house behind holding warmth and work, and a future they'd built side by side. What they had wasn't loud or grand. It didn't need to be. It was steady. It was theirs. And it would last.